Societal collapse events are accelerating. Things are happening faster and faster in scope, in intensity, and in frequency. We are seeing day after day one unprecedented event after another. And I don't believe it's the result of confirmation bias or because we have more technology at our fingertips and we're just paying attention to it more and we just have that information at our disposal. That is a Steven Pinker analysis, is to say that, well, it's because we have access to the internet now that we're just seeing bad things more. Completely irrespective of the fact that we now live in a globalized world and global catastrophe is actually a thing. Man-made global catastrophe is a thing, which was not the case 100 years ago even. 100 years ago we could have a world war, but it wasn't existential to mankind. 100 years ago, we didn't have the risks of cyber attacks that could bring down large portions of the grid. We didn't have weapons that we could send out into outer space and completely destroy the power grids of whole continents. And arguably, we didn't have an elaborate interconnected transportation system on a global scale that could spread a virus around the world as rapidly as we just seen in 2020. And of course, there's other existential threats as well, be they related to the overconsumption of resources, overpopulation, migration, civil conflicts, climate issues. All of these things were things that were not present 100 years ago. And it's the rapidity of change. It's the fact that we don't know what we're going to see on the news tomorrow. There was a time when things happened at a glacial-like pace, where it took a long time for a system to collapse. But nowadays, as we become more interconnected, this intricate artifice of civilization and institutions and structures that we've knit together in this fine, sophisticated tapestry that sustains the 8 billion people on this planet, there's vulnerabilities like never before. Each one of these nodes in the network, like the Suez Canal and the turnboat, which blocked all traffic, each one of these is a potential point of failure. And as these continue to mount, and as we reach a period of austerity, as we reach a period where the facade is starting to crack and we're starting to notice the cracks in the facade, because with all of these collapse events that unfold, there's always warning signs, but they're never apparent. The warning signs of collapse are always buried deep within the facade, deep within the foundation that you don't see. It's like when you're chopping down a tree. There's a point when you can hear it. You can hear that final little splinter. Did you hear it? Oh, no, maybe it's not. Maybe I saw a little bit more. You saw a little bit more, and then that one little splinter of wood is what was holding that tree up. And all it took was a little bit of force to force it over. And that is the cracks in the facade. It's like the petri dish metaphor, the test tube metaphor with a bacteria. With bacteria, if you were to take a test tube and you put one bacteria in there and it was multiplying at an exponential pace, you wouldn't see anything with the naked eye for hours, maybe 10 hours. At the first sign that you see something, the first time you see that little bit of, let's say it's green, you get exponential growth in the visual form. So it might have taken 10 hours to get to that point where you can first identify that crack in the facade, but once you see it, it grows, and then within a span of minutes, perhaps seconds, that test tube is filled. Such is the law of compounding exponential growth. And such is the cascading effect of collapsing large, complex social systems. Now, what's most disconcerting to me, and what really made me think about this, is I was having a conversation with somebody just about the rapidity and the pace of collapse of the citadel of Aleppo. This was a bastion of defense for the Syrian army, and it literally collapsed within an hour. And we have to ask ourselves, are there other examples of this? And if this is the case, that our attention can be so quickly redirected from concerns about nuclear confrontation on the European continent, which are still incredibly pertinent, but so quickly we can have our attention shifted from one catastrophe to another. And these are all black swan events in the truest form. It's very disconcerting to know that whatever is happening in the news today might well be overshadowed by some other major global event that is unfolding tomorrow. Something that we could not have anticipated at all. And the thing is that anything is possible. It's not simply, waiting for things to go wrong. It's just awareness that we're getting very close to seeing that bacteria in the petri dish. And once you see it, that's when you really got to be watching out. There are so many cognitive biases which prevent people from maintaining prudent levels of vigilance. The normalcy bias is a classic one, underestimating the likelihood of certain disasters. Because nothing has happened in the past, you presume that nothing will happen in the future, ignorant to the fact that you likely have only been alive for a very small sliver of human evolution and societal evolution, and that these things happen all the time. And quite frankly, human nature has not changed at all. We are exactly the same biological beings that we were during World War II. The same people that put people into concentration camps are walking around right now, only there's 8 billion of them, and arguably the people today are much weaker and much more conformist and much more likely to succumb to the bandwagon effects and the group thinking effects of things. Conformity. People are more likely to conform. There's more weak-willed people today than there was back then because you had to at least be tough in order to survive. Now people are entitled. I was reading a post the other day, there's restaurants saying don't come in if you don't plan on giving a 25% tip. What? I mean, that is the society that we live in where we feel entitled to things? That's a society which is just held together by threads. And the problem with it is that all of these biases, be they our optimism bias, this idea that we tend to underestimate negative outcomes and overestimate the likelihood of positive outcomes. We just presume that things are going to continue to get better and better and not worse. Why? Because they have throughout the course of our lifetime. Because we've, generally speaking, been in a bull market for the last 40 odd years, barring a few economic downturns. Even the Great Recession was a very small blip in the pathway towards what is now a 45,000 strong Dow and a 6,000 strong S&P 500. Look at the stock market crash of 1929. This best exemplifies this concept that things are worst right after things are best. You look at 1929, days before that stock market crash. Things were still rising. You were right at the top, right at the penthouse. That market was just going up and up and up. People buying stocks on margin. And then what happened? Within the span of a few hours, one simple splinter of a tree, one rich guy decided to sell. And the whole thing came crashing down abruptly. Now, in 1929, it took a bit longer. Because in order to do trades, it took a lot longer. Nowadays, you can trade at light speed. That's why bank runs like Silicon Valley Bank, this is why these things just crash immediately. This is why these meme coins, like was the most recent example, the Hok Tua meme coin that went from 0 to 500 million in an hour and then crashed to 30 million in the next hour, wiping out a bunch of hopeless fools that quite frankly had it coming. That's Darwinism. That's evolution, baby. If you're going to be investing in a meme coin invented by a girl who spits on dicks, then you deserve what you have coming. No pun intended. There are so many examples of this. The decision to allow deep strikes into Russia, like, what? That was abrupt, wasn't it? They just made the decision one day. The decision to invade the Russian mainland with the assistance of NATO, that was completely, nobody expected that. Ukrainian front lines were collapsing, and all of a sudden they do that? We are living in the age of extremes, and the pendulum swings more wildly by the day. I mean, even this decision today, this hasty decision, the Canadian government just decided to pretty much ban every single semi-automatic rifle. And what are they going to do? Well, they're saying that they're going to send them over there to a war, to the Ukrainians, to a war that's not popular. A portion of the public do not approve of this conflict. Now we're going to continuously send over our weapons. We are going to forfeit our democratic rights so that some other country that has an unelected leader, who's now unelected, he's now overstayed his term, they're under martial law, you can't do anything, you get pulled off the streets and sent to the front line to die in a trench, so they're going to now take our rights away, take our guns away, and only give them back to us when these rich motherfuckers are ready to throw us into the meat grinder so they can make more money. Look at Joe Biden. What was it? July, June? Everybody was like, oh yeah, Biden's good, he's ready to go. All the media in unison. And then the flip happened. Immediately, within 24 hours, Biden had to go, right? They've been telling us for years, yes, this guy's of cognitively sound mind. He's perfectly fine. And then within a day, one bad debate performance where they could no longer contain the state of his dementia, they finally said, okay, that was it. And then all of a sudden, all you heard about was Kamala. Just like that. Just instantaneous. Look at the Trump assassination attempt. Could you imagine if that head didn't turn in the way it did, where we would be today? Could you imagine? That was the quintessential definition of dodging a bullet. It doesn't get more perfect than that. That should be in the dictionary, the Trump experience, because had that bullet hit, it would have led to civil conflict. That would have caused a collapse of the dollar. People would have divested from their U.S. securities and treasuries, and things would have been much different than they were now. But fortunately, just by a stroke of luck, we dodged a bullet. We can only dodge so many bullets. Every single day, it's something else. And it's not confirmation bias. I know what the Steven Pinker school is going to say. Well, you're just observing this more because you have access to the internet 24/7 and you're seeing everything that's happening going on in the world. All this stuff went on through all of history, but no, it didn't. Because there was a time when these global crises were impossible. There was no such thing as a global crisis. You're basically limited to your locale. You know, you're only ever going to see a handful of girls your entire life within a 100-mile radius if you're lucky, right? Nowadays, in the globalized, interconnected world, things happen very fast. Think about the blue screen of death attack. These are all things that happened just in the past 6 months to a year, where 1 billion computers simultaneously went down because of a failed update, they claim, completely brought airlines to a standstill and brought our society in many respects to a standstill. And that was arguably a very tame cybersecurity glitch. Could you imagine something of a broader scale? And of course, as the network expands and as the interconnections expand, each one of those interconnecting nodes that is complemented with the Internet of Things device is an attack vector. So you can bring down the entire system. like monoculture. These monoculture farms with the biologically homogeneous chickens and cows. They're all very similar, and as long as they're in a very tightly climate-controlled environment where you control all of what goes in and what goes out, they'll do fine and they'll produce. But as soon as the wrong virus gets in there, that one virus, because of that homogeneity, affects everything. And because of the lack of diversity, you are more vulnerable to be taken out by one pathogen. Look at the Iranian retaliatory attack when hundreds of ballistic missiles, for the first time in history, the biggest ballistic missile attack in history, happened just out of nowhere. People have already forgotten about it. In fact, if you would have told people about that 2 years ago, they would never have believed in a million years that Iran would do that, number one, and we wouldn't be in a state of full-blown nuclear conflict, which is not a testament to the resilience of the system. It's a testament, thankfully, to the cowardice of our leadership. Because as much as they're willing to push the boundaries, they don't want to die. But the problem is they're gambling in such a way where they're messing with the strategic defeat of other nuclear superpowers, which very well could put them in a position where they have no choice but to retaliate with the nuclear level. Those visuals of those ballistic missiles coming in, I mean, that is something we never seen before. Now that is in the human psyche. Now we have a template for it, so that when it happens again, it's not going to be as shocking. You know, the idea of the pandemic spreading as rapidly as it did, that in itself, and it could have spread much faster, of course, but this is something that would have taken a long time in the past, not necessarily in 1918, because of course there was a war going on. So the flu spread much quicker, but even with all of the safeguards and the social distancing and the mask and all the other bullshit rules that we know didn't work now, it still spread to the entire planet. And the next one is probably going to be worse. It's going to find ways to circumvent all of these stop gaps and safeguards that we've put in place. Look at October 7th, the Mad Max paraglider thing. You know, just an abrupt blitzkrieg maneuver that nobody expected, although there is some intelligence suggesting some people knew. But you know what I mean? Like, nobody could have expected that. We were fixated on Russia and Ukraine at the time. These things are happening more and more frequently. I don't know what we're going to be talking about tomorrow. We're going to talk about the rapid fall of Aleppo. That's something that nobody could have anticipated. Nobody in a million years would have thought that the Russians and the Iranians would be immediately chased out of Syria due to a bunch of ragtag sectarians, radicals. Nobody would have thought that. I mean, sure, it's not as though armies have not collapsed abruptly in the past, but in light of everything else that's been going on, you would think that the Syrians would have been more vigilant. But no. And so, of course, each one of these things that happens increases the likelihood that things go bad on other parts of the map. If you chase the Russians out of Syria, guess what? That means that they have fewer and fewer options. And that means that they have to look more at their nuclear option. If you chase the Russians out of Damascus, which it looks like that could happen, then that's going to mean that the Russians, they're going to be forced to take action because those are their proxy staging areas. That is their ability to exert influence within the Middle East. If that falls, then potentially their entire alliance begins to crumble bit by bit. And of course, that means it increases the likelihood of direct war with one of the main drivers behind this conflict, which of course is the United States. Think about that South Korean martial law thing. Nobody was talking about that. Nobody. Then within the span of, because I pay very close attention to social media, within the span of 15 minutes, every single post I came across was about martial law. And then as quick as it came, as fast as it went, it was over. It was repealed. Yeah, we just decided to impose martial law. Now we're going to repeal that because it didn't work in the way we wanted to, or we were just trying to send a message. Who knows? But it didn't work. So back to the drawing board. The pager attack. That was the first video I did, the first breaking news video I did, driving to work. I've never done that. And no, I'm paying attention to the road, don't worry. But I was able to prop my phone up in a way that I was able to do the video and report on the event. 5,000 pagers simultaneously exploding, being activated by some sort of frequency or internet message, text message. Unheard of stuff. Even the decapitation strikes, completely unheard of. Everything is happening at a blitzkrieg pace nowadays. And it's abrupt. We don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. But you need to be incredibly vigilant. I mean, this is best exemplified by the Russian Orezhnik missile. Think about that. Nobody could have imagined, well, I mean, we could have obviously, but the average person, the average normie, they weren't expecting to see that on their TVs. They don't know what the hell that is. Intermediate range ballistic missile with multiple independent reentry vehicles. These are things that people just were not aware of, the majority of people. And then suddenly, that's where we are. We're in that stage of the game. The speed of those missiles is exactly what I'm talking about. It's a great metaphor because everything is speeding up. The collapse is speeding up. Once the dominoes start falling, the collapse of the house of cards, entropy, you can explain it in a million and one different ways. But things are speeding up. There's no doubt about that. You look at the adoption of technology, just the speed in which new software, new services, new apps are adopted by people. ChatGPT is the greatest example, I think, where I think it was 1 million people signed on in the first hour or something. It used to take years to have anything adopted by 1 million people. And because of that, there's vulnerability there, right? Now, what the architects of this system have become very adept at papering over the problem. They've become very good at band-aid solutions. The best example of this is what the Federal Reserve does, right? They continuously find a way to make sure that we're always kind of teetering on the brink, but we never really get there, right? And the United States has been lucky enough to avoid a civil war because that's quite frankly the only thing at this point in time that is going to bring down the US dollar because it is the global reserve currency. It is the safe haven that all retreat to. So the US can create as much chaos as they want in the world. In fact, creating chaos is somewhat beneficial to the dollar because people still think that their money is safe in US banks. It's only when civil conflict arises in the United States that comes under threat. But there's a lot of other factors there, don't get me wrong. The markets are teetering on the brink of collapse. 1929, the Roaring '20s, at the peak, on the day before the crash. You know that people were in peak euphoria. And then, boom, just like that, crash. That's what's going to happen. Right now, the markets are at staggeringly high levels, far more overvalued than in 1929. It makes no fiscal sense whatsoever. Warren Buffett's going to be 100 soon, and he's still not going to see the crash. That guy's stockpiling so much cash on the sidelines to buy this, what should be an inevitable crash, but even he underestimates how irrational the system has become and how good these architects have become at patching up the system. It's like there's a building, right, and there's cracks showing in the facade. You just take a little bit of mortar and paint over it. That's what they're good at. They're good at just keeping it propped up and keeping everybody satiated. But eventually, the cracks become too numerous. And you hear that little splinter, and then boom. You know, another good metaphor is a sinking ship. There's holes in this sinking ship. You can keep plugging the holes. But eventually, you got more plug than there is boat. At that point, all it takes is one little slight breeze and the bow breaks in half. There's so many examples of this. I mean, the Silicon Valley bank run, the bank runs that happen. You can have a cryptocurrency crash in minutes. You can have people withdraw their entire savings in minutes now or move it into different accounts. You could never do that before. Things can happen so damn fast nowadays, people don't realize. Most people are blinded by their own biases. Look at resource depletion. I mean, look at the population of the planet. It's 8 billion people. I'm by no means one of these depopulation people. I think people should have as many kids as you possibly can. Because quite frankly, there's going to be a lot of lonely people in a few years, the way the demographic situation is going. But, let's say you were on an island. And on this island, there was a finite amount of coconuts. But the people acted as though coconuts weren't finite. Coconuts were infinite. Well, you'd be having a very good time. In fact, the night before the final coconuts were eaten, because these people were so ignorant, it would be a party. But on that very day, when the realization sunk in that the last coconut was eaten, that's when people turn on each other. That's when game theory begins to unfold, and the conflict for resources ensues. And because they're trapped on this island, chances are, eventually they resort to cannibalism and other forms of warfare for the remaining coconut husks that people have now been forced to eat. And eventually it leads to extinction because, of course, there's not enough people to repopulate the planet and there's no resources because you've eaten all the final coconuts. Maybe you cut down the trees too because you tried to make a boat out of there at the last minute, but you didn't have enough energy. You didn't have enough coconut juice to keep you alive to build that boat. That's the situation we could find ourselves in. These are unprecedented times. And vigilant is paramount. We have to be vigilant. That doesn't mean being permanently paranoid. That just means listening. Listening for the cracks. Looking for the cracks. Because once you hear that crack happen, once the panic sinks in, I'm telling you, man, once the first nuke drops, the level of panic that we see when just something minor happens, like Putin launches an intermediate range ballistic missile, the Rezhnik, our phone just lights up. I can't imagine what it's going to be like. There's probably an equation here. The extent to which people are ignorant prior to collapse is the extent that they're going to freak the fuck out when collapse happens because you're ill prepared. If you're a resourceful jack of all trades prior to collapse and collapse happens, it's something you can manage. But if you were just one of these self-serving, decadent individuals with your heads in the clouds in the urban environment, feeling very entitled to this, that, and everything, and all of a sudden you're forced to be self-reliant, you're going to freak the fuck out, right? All these people say, I wouldn't want to live in that anyways. Bull. Your entire life is about the self. Selfish. Maybe the people in the 1930s when, they basically had these very large families, they acted far more selflessly. Maybe they could say that, well, I wouldn't want to live in those conditions anyways. People nowadays living the selfie life who only care about themselves, you think these people are going to be able to just be like, well, I guess I should accept my fate because the shit hits the fan? No, complete opposite. Complete and utter opposite. We're going to regress towards many means. And you can make it easier on yourself if you try to pre-normalize yourself, okay? This is what prepping is. There's an epiphany that happens for a prepper at some point in their life. They realize the vulnerability. It's like an aha moment. It's like, holy shit, I'm vulnerable. And I don't know what it is. I don't know if you have to have an awareness of the inherent corruption within the system in order to truly appreciate the fact that your life is being dictated by largely a bunch of self-serving oligarchs and elites, that's who's at the top of the pyramid. They don't care if you live or die. That's what you need to understand. They're currently in the process of taking our guns and sending them off to a war that nobody approves of anymore so that these guys can die, a certain death on the front lines with our guns that we worked hard for and that we deserve to have as law-abiding citizens. They want to take that away because they know it's going to be easier to take everything else when the time comes because people are compliant. We are the exact same biological beings as we were in World War II, as we were throughout the medieval ages, as we were throughout the Roman Empire and the Egyptian empires. We are the exact same biological beings. Nothing has changed. We are still motivated by the same set of fears and inclinations as we were back then. The only difference now is that technology, the artifice, the facade of these very sophisticated and complex social structures has masked that and has satiated that desire for now. We have not morally evolved. And in fact, I would say that we've devolved in many ways. It's just that we've always been in abundance, and that side has not had a chance to express itself in the way it's going to when things get down to the wire. So the question really is, what the hell is going to happen next? Because we don't know. Nobody was thinking about South Korea declaring martial law because they're worried about North Korea. Nobody was thinking that. But it tells you it's a harbinger for something. And as quickly as those events unfold, quickly people go back to sleep because the cognitive bias is so strong. Normalcy bias, recency bias, optimism bias, the idea that, well, nothing has happened lately, or whatever is happening lately is going to be what I base all my future predictions on. This is not how the world works. Normalcy bias is one of the craziest things, and I'll never truly understand it. You can have so many things happen within the span of a year, things that if only they happened years ago, maybe we would appreciate how far we've fallen from grace. We need to be vigilant, my friends, because things are speeding up. We've had a long period of the peace dividend, and we've enjoyed this indemnity from catastrophic events. We've had it very good for a long time, and we're peaking. I mean, we should have peaked a long time ago, but we continue to peak, it seems, somehow. Sometimes they just keep finding a way to plug the holes in the sinking ship. But eventually, it has to happen, and the longer we kick the cans down the road, the worse it's going to get. So I guess the point of this video is to get people to appreciate how fast our attention is being redirected from one thing to the next. And it's because it's collapsing. It is collapsing, and it is collapsing fast. It seems slow because compared to like a TikTok short, it takes a minute for World War III to start. But in the history books, people will say, well, look what happened pre-Nazi Germany. All the signs were there throughout the 30s, but nothing was happening, right? Cracks in the facade. There's signs before any collapse. There's signs, there's conditions. You can see there's evidence that it's coming. You just have to have the right set of eyes and the right set of ears. And that's what we try to bring people here at the Canadian Prepper channel. We try to bring you an awareness of the information that you need and that you can assess on your own. Try to do it free of political bias, because political bias clouds your vision. In order to be a prepper, I think one of the central characteristics is, at least temporarily, having the ability to remove yourself from your political biases. You can be a Trump person. I certainly ain't a Trudeau person right now, I can tell you that much. But I can still set aside my biases temporarily to ensure that I'm seeing the situation clearly. Because there's interests that seek to exploit you on both sides, whether it's your side. In fact, the people who are on your side are more apt to exploit you because, well, you trust them. But also get prepared. And what I've always took issue with is these channels and these activists who see how fucked up the system is. They're constantly telling us about, how crazy the people at the top are, yet they never say you should get prepared. And it almost makes me wonder, if a person is aware of how screwed up the system is and realizes that there's a sense of inevitability here, then why aren't they telling people to prepare? Is that not a little suspicious? Like all the anti-war people, I appreciate you. I appreciate your sacrifice. Because I know it comes with a lot of sacrifice to put your neck out like that. But why aren't you telling people, if you know where this is going? I realize it's optimism bias. That's what they're stricken with when it comes to preparedness. They would rationalize it as, well, you should focus on, solutions as opposed to getting prepared for things getting worse. But it's only prudent at this point in time, when you see what's going on in the world at an increasing pace, on an increasing scale, increased intensity, increased frequency, that you take it upon yourself. It is incumbent upon you as an individual who has loving family and friends. You have to be ready to fend for yourself. Don't think that this society built by all these monkeys who have their own set of interests and their own family members who, at the end of the day, and I would not fault them for it, have to put them before you, don't think that these monkeys are going to keep you alive when things get down to the wire. We know continuity of government plans. We know that they're going to save themselves if something really bad is coming. And you're going to be the last to know because they don't care. We're just tax slaves. And I'm not trying to get political, it's just the truth. They don't care. You look at the smug, scornful look on the faces of these guys who want to take all our guns today, knowing full well that it's not going to change crime, it's not going to change drug addiction, that they just want to deprive you of rights because they don't like you. They're control freaks. And it's not even that they were born that way, it's just what this system turns people into. They're sociopaths. Not psychopaths, they're sociopaths. They weren't born that way. Maybe some of them were, but they just don't give a shit. And they're a reflection of all the flaws of our civilization, which is ending. The collapse happens fast, so get ready for it.